Hello and welcome to another edition of Community Forum. My name is Joseph Feaster. I'm the host of the program, and if you're watching this program, you must be sitting in air conditioning because my guest and me, we are not. But nonetheless, we're going to have a great program, so you sit back, relax, use the air conditioning, go get the popcorn, and hopefully you will enjoy the program. I am delighted to have my guest who I have with me today. He's a young man. He has been active in so many organizations, so many issues of importance. As we look at the political climate that exists in the United States and across the world today, to find a young person so much engaged, so much involved in civic engagement, political activism, is really heartwarming for me. I can say that now that I'm older, but understand the importance of being involved in what's going on in our world. And my guest today is Jeremy Cronig. He happens to be the nephew of one of my producers, but the executive producer, Roy Cohen, was very excited about the work that Jeremy has been doing. So he's introduced him to the Community Forum family, and so let me welcome him today. Jeremy, welcome to Community Forum.
Thank you for having me.
As I said at the top of the program, I'm very intrigued by your activism at such a young age. But again, age is not the factor, it's what's in one's heart and what's in one's spirit. Talk to me about how you became involved in community engagement. I would always like the viewing audience to have a sense of the person who is speaking with them. And so why don't you tell us about where you grew up, what are some of the things that influenced and made you the Jeremy Cronig that's sitting here with me today?
Sure. So I'm originally from Shaker Heights, Ohio, which is a suburb of Cleveland. Shaker is a very activist community, very politically engaged. And I was very lucky, as my Uncle Roy knows, to have very incredible parents who were very interested in politics. There was always talk of politics, very giving people and a very giving family, and I think that was the foundation for who I am today. Another big piece, not that we're going to talk about this, I'm a huge Cleveland sports fan, which is also a very big part of who I am. So if there are any Celtics fans watching this, it's been a fun couple of years of beating you guys. But other than Cleveland sports, and I'm a student at Ohio State now studying public policy and economics. But my activism comes largely from my involvement in Judaism. So I went to Jewish summer camp my whole life growing up. And that was a big part of who I am, and we can get into this more, but Judaism has a very deep connection to social justice work, and has for as long as it's existed in the United States, and that is something that really instilled within me this sense of activism and caring about the world and caring about others. And I also am a big advocate for young people getting involved, because I don't think that me being involved at this young age should be surprising. I think it's something that people my age want that opportunity, but don't necessarily get.
I want to drill down on some of these, because you gave some illustrations which I think would be helpful, particularly for young persons who may be watching the program, and certainly it would be informative for any person watching the program. Mm-hmm. You talked about the importance of what went on around the dinner table. Mm-hmm. You talked about the importance of your faith and your religion. Let's drill down and let's amplify that. Let's take a snapshot, a look back at the types of conversations and things that you learned from your parents, and with more detail. And then let's talk about your religion as a focus on that, not only in going to Hebrew school, but also the Hebrew camp. Let's talk about that.
Sure. So I think the main thing that my parents have given me is a sense of giving. They're incredibly giving people who never in my life has someone asked my dad to fix something or my mother for help with something and they said no. And I think involving politics around each election, we would have people staying at our house, just volunteers that needed housing. Every election that I can remember, we had people staying in our house, in our basement, in my room. I would sleep on the couch. And so it was just a sense of you do things for other people because that's what we do. And it's something I think going into the larger world, I've taken for granted with my parents because I don't think that's necessarily something that everyone really practices, just that giving. And so I think, I can't think of a specific moment or conversation, but it's just sort of the way that I was raised.
Well, that's very, very encouraging because I think that for most of us who are engaged in that type of work, they probably had similar types of beginnings where you had influences. It may have been in the home, it may have been outside the home, but you had persons around you who gave you some insight into you got to do more than just for yourself. You got to think beyond yourself. So I mean, that's something good to hear. But I am going to hop on the age piece because we've seen over the past number of elections, the millennials, which you're in, being 21 years of age now, and just to harken back, you said you were introduced to politics at a younger age and being 21. So I'm trying to say, my goodness, that's you really you were a teenage prodigy. I am going to talk about the fact that you're a millennial because we're looking to you, your age group, your folks who are engaged in social media, et cetera, to take the leadership role in our electoral politics now. So let's talk about some of the training and the things that you were engaged in, which would exemplify that.
Sure. So I think my real formal introduction into social justice, social action was through my Reformed Jewish Youth Movement, which is called NIFTY. And NIFTY was a huge part of my life in high school. So NIFTY is the Reformed Jewish Youth Movement with about 10,000 members across North America. And they meet for weekends, and you have big conventions where you meet up with your friends, and I've made all of my best friends in Jewish Youth Group. But a big part of what NIFTY does is social justice work, where a lot of other youth movements are more about the social aspect, or maybe more about the Jewish aspect. NIFTY was very invested in social justice work. In the leadership camp I went to the summer before my senior year of high school, NIFTY's leadership camp really instilled in me how my religion, and if I wanted to practice Judaism, if I wanted to be a part of the religion, which is maybe the biggest part of who I am, it had to come with that justice piece, because that's a part of who we are. And so I was lucky enough to serve in leadership in my youth group, and took a year off before college, and I took a gap year to serve as NIFTY's international president. So I was representing those 10,000 young people across the country, around the world, and was able to really focus on instilling this sense of justice in young people. And a large part of what we worked on was gun violence prevention, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit, and that's a big part of what I care about. But in this role, I was really able to work with young people and see how much young people really do care. I think what you were mentioning, millennials not voting, which I think we'll see will be different this time around, I'm hoping.
What they did with President Obama.
They did, yes.
They did come out then.
Yes, they did.
They stayed home in the last election,
correct.
But hopefully they'll reassert
right.
themselves.
And we've seen more youth turnout in primaries this year, and I think a lot of that has to do with the activism by the students from Parkland, Florida, after the shooting at Stoneman Douglas High School. But I think I was able to see at a young age the potential and the real care that young people have, and how the reputation that we have of not caring is ridiculous.
Well, what I like to do is, because I know we have a clip,
Sure.
and I want to let our viewing audience see you in action.
Sure.
So why don't we bring up the clip on a Nifty so that we can watch some of that and we can talk about it
Sure.
once it's completed.
Sure.
You know, I was going to come out of the ark, but I thought against it. Shabbat Shalom. It is so meaningful for me to be here today at the URJ Biennial, my first, to learn, study, pray, and celebrate with the most amazing lay leaders, teens, Jewish professionals, and clergy we have in our movement. This evening, we have the opportunity as 5,000 strong to welcome Shabbat, a time where we look back at the week that was, our successes, our failures, our joy, and a time to rest from our work. So with this self-reflection, Shabbat asks us the question, where are we and where do we want to be? Where are we in our lives, in our work, in our communities? The biblical version of this spiritual question comes with the Hebrew word ayeka, which translates as, where are you? In Genesis 3:9, God asks this of Adam after he and Eve have eaten from the tree of knowledge. God is not asking where they are physically. God is really asking Adam to examine the choices he has made. This comes up multiple times in the Torah, this question of ayeka, and it acts as our spiritual barometer of sorts. Not only asking where we are physically, but where we are spiritually in our connection to God. Jews today still have this question, this test. Today, Shabbat and our practice of it is our ayeka moment. Each week on this day of reflection, again, we repeat this question, where are we and where do we want to be? I want to tell you about my personal response to this idea of a Shabbat ayeka. Shabbat for me is a special experience, like for many of us, because of URJ camps and Nifty. Being a part of Nifty, I know the feeling of togetherness that Shabbat can bring. We all know that we are barely able to sit still on the bus rides to events, waiting to run, greet, and basically tackle our best friends. Throughout the year, Niftyites are separated in our different cities, and then on Shabbat, we come together. We pray together. We learn together, and we make our closest connections together, all on Shabbat. We sometimes don't realize this, but this is what Shabbat means to Niftyites. Everything. At Nifty, we respond to Shabbat's ayeka with a resounding voice that brings us together emotionally and physically. However, the issue arises for me and my contemporaries when we eventually leave our immersive times in Nifty and at camp. In a spiritual sense, it's the feeling that after we leave these places and these environments, we lose and feel lost in our connection to Shabbat. Granted, we cannot replicate exactly those intensive communities in our home congregations, yet we want to connect to Shabbat, but we find this to be a struggle. This does not only have to do with the instruments used or the tunes used during the service. It's about defining the Shabbat experience. It's about why we are praying, not how we are praying, not just how we are praying. Why are we doing this? Why do we even pray? We are always exploring this why in Nifty, always discovering our Judaism. And we want this to continue in meaningful ways in our home congregations. This is where my peers and I need your partnership. We need to respond to Shabbat's Ayeka for the future of this movement, but we cannot do this alone. It centers around synagogue members building relationships with teens in their community, find common ground and common goals, and create a true partnership. Start a dialogue in your congregation about how these vital relationships can be created and fostered. This will assist in creating the sense of community and connection that we so desperately crave away from Nifty and camp. You all out there have the ability to bring Shabbat more into our lives by doing so. And if we can succeed in this, we will be able to welcome the next generation successfully into Jewish adulthood. It is so incredible for thousands of us to be celebrating Shabbat here in Orlando together. Hinenu, here we are as one movement. This is the ultimate Ayeka moment. We are examining where we are as Reformed Jews, where we are innovating, where we are succeeding, and truly examining the question of where do we want to be. I am so inspired by the hard and meaningful work done here at the Biennial. I'm inspired by the sense of partnership I have already felt between teens and adults during my time in Nifty, and I am inspired because I know it will continue to grow in the future. In order to fully embrace Shabbat and all that Reformed Judaism has to offer, we need to do it together. Shabbat Shalom.
So, Jeremy, we just showed a tape of a Nifty event, and that's the Reformed Jewish Youth Movement. Mm-hmm. Why don't you put it in context? Tell us where this event was, who was there, and all of those types of details, so our viewing audience has a real sense of putting them in a place where you were for this particular speech that you gave.
Sure. So you saw at the end of the video, the URJ logo showed up, and so the URJ is the Union for Reform Judaism, which is the umbrella organization for all of the Reform Jewish congregations that we have in the United States. So Reform Judaism is the largest sect of Judaism with about 1.5 million members. So that was the URJ's, the Reform Movement's big biennial event. So every 2 years, clergy, lay leaders, youth from all across the Reformed Jewish Youth Movement in North America come together. So that was in 2015 when I was serving as Nifty's international president, and I got the honor and the privilege to speak to the biennial event. So it was clergy and lay leaders, and it was a really incredible opportunity to talk about what Shabbat, which is the day of rest for Jews, means to young people.
Now, where was this event held?
This was in Orlando.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I just came back from Orlando.
Yeah, that's great.
But I wasn't at that event. But let's do this. I know you also mentioned there was a very distinguished political figure that was at this event, and you had an opportunity to meet him. So why don't you talk about that a minute?
So Joe Biden was the keynote speaker of that event, and so Joe is one of my all-time heroes, and so I got to meet Joe Biden. I was in the little photo line thing.
And that was when he was vice president.
That was when he was vice president, and he gave a shout out to the youth movement and mentioned that he had met me to the room of 5,000 people, and that was one of the coolest things that has ever happened.
Where your stock went up right there in the organization.
It did. It was great.
I also want to do this because, again, I think getting people to understand different religions, different cultures is important.
Sure.
Explain to this audience what's the difference between a Reformed Jew and there are different sects. Can you talk about all of them and just give them a sense of what that means? It's still practicing the religion, but they practice it in different ways.
Sure.
Talk about it.
So Judaism is one religion, right? There aren't like different really denominations. It's by really how observant you are with the laws, like the Jewish laws, sort of. So the three main ones are the three main ones are it's Reform Judaism, which is the largest in North American Jewish life, and that's about 1.5 million people, and that is what I wouldn't call it least observant because people think that then you're just not Jewish, but it's the most open, it's the most accepting, it's the most welcoming. And a big part of Reform Judaism is that Judaism is a part of who you are, and no matter if you want to keep kosher and you don't want to mix milk and meat and not eat pork, or you are Jewish because that is who you are, then you're Jewish. And as you get more observant, it gets a little more exclusive of who is Jewish and who is not. So then you have conservative Judaism, which is a little bit more observant, which is sort of in the middle between Reform, and then you have Orthodox. So Orthodox, like the name, they're the orthodoxy of the religion, and they are very observant and observe much more of the traditional Jewish law, keeping kosher, not using electricity or doing work on the Sabbath, and so those are the different delineations. Everybody's Jewish. It just sort of depends on how observant you are.
Thank you. I mean, I knew it generally because I have had the occasions in the past. I was a good friend of the late Lenny Zakim, from whom the Zakim Bridge is named. He was the head of the ADL. We served jointly, co-chairing several different organizations. And I had the privilege of going to Israel with him in 1984, along with a number of other leaders. And I know you told me that you've been to Israel as well, and we were talking about experiences. Why don't you talk about yours? I'll leave mine to another day.
Sure.
I want to focus on you.
I've been 4 or 5 times, I think. I've been very lucky to be able to go. And I've gone back a couple times for conferences, through the Reform movement, which is what I was talking about before. Israel's a really special place. It is special for everyone, and we were joking before, as that's part of the problem, is that it's special for everyone, and there's not a lot of land there. But Israel it's an incredible place because you can go to Tel Aviv, which is where the airport is, and you go, it's a beautiful Mediterranean city on the water, and you go to some of the coolest not that I have, but the coolest nightclubs.
I did.
There you go. So some of the coolest nightclubs in the world, one of the best food scenes and beaches, and you drive 45 minutes on the highway and you're in Jerusalem, which is feels like you're going back hundreds of years in time, maybe thousands of years, when you walk into Jerusalem in the old city, and how holy it is for every major religion.
It's almost like 25 or 30 square miles. It's between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, which is east to west. Is west to east.
Right.
I mean, it's
right. And you can drive that short amount of time and go and be in one of the most holy cities in the world. And for each religion and how the cultures interact, and that gets very contentious most of the time, but it's a very special place. And it's special to me because even though American Jews are very comfortable in the United States, there's a thing about being Jewish that you're never too comfortable where you are, because we've been persecuted in basically every single situation that we've been in for thousands of years. And so even though I don't feel threatened on a daily basis as a Jew in the United States, the idea that there is a Jewish state that is the ultimate guarantor for my safety and my people's safety is something that I'm lucky, because that has never happened in the history of Judaism.
And one of the things I won't dwell upon Israel on this program so much, but one of the other things we know that they are under everyone serves in the military, men and women up to a particular age. I think it's up to 60-something years in terms they serve. And they're surrounded, if you talk about by Lebanon, Syria, Jordan,
Right.
they have the Sinai, Egypt. So it's a situation where they are always paying attention to their security.
Correct.
But let's talk about your activism. We've talked about it from the standpoint of learning it at the kitchen table, your involvement of your family in politics early on, the recognition that giving back and helping people was important. You then took that to your own involvement outside of that in terms of the organizational pieces by your going to Judaic schools, as well as in terms of the camp, getting involved in the movement with NIFTY and things of that nature. Your activism has also taken you to engage with other ethnic groups, so that one doesn't sit here and think that your total involvement is only within the Jewish community. But there are things you've done. I know you're the founder of the Students Against Gun Violence.
Correct.
I know you may have moved on from there now and we'll talk about what you're going to be doing presently in the future. But let's talk about that, because that's important. That has been a major issue. We've had so many situations in this country where guns have created, not only do we have situations whereby strangers are being killed by strangers, but we have a proliferation of killings all across this country as a result of guns, and we don't seem to be able to, in our political environment in the United States, to come to some type of accord to lessen the gun violence. I know that you've been a leader in that particular area. Tell our viewing audience all about all the great things you did along with your other colleagues.
Sure. So I think that gridlock on this issue gets at the core of why I care about this issue, why I got involved with this issue, and why I think, as we've seen this year with the teens from Parkland, why young people getting involved with it in this issue is so important and the only way that we can really break through that gridlock. So a big part of my experience as NIFTY's North American president was helping craft and run our gun violence prevention campaign. So it was the first social justice campaign that the youth movement had really participated in and planned and ran. And so through that campaign, we educated our teens, we mobilized our teens, and we connected them with their communities to do this work in partnership with other groups. So it's not just preventing Jews from getting shot, it's gun violence prevention for the communities that we live in. So I got invested in this issue because I remember it was the summer of, I think it was 2014, and the shooting at UC Santa Barbara had just happened, and most of us probably don't even remember that because there's one every day. But there was a shooting called the Isla Vista Massacre, and I remember seeing it on TV. It popped up on CNN, and I remember thinking, "Oh, it's just another shooting," and I sat on that for a month or so, and I remembered that moment. I was at the Jewish summer camp I went to, the leadership camp, and we were talking about being invested in your community and caring. And that moment popped into my head where I thought about people getting shot with a gun in the United States and thinking, oh, it's just another one, right? And I got so mad at myself that it's the issue that I want to work on my entire life, because I think that it's insane that there would ever be a moment in our country where someone's life would be taken with a firearm and we just think it's normal. And once we let it be normal, which we have, then it will never change.
Well, tell us the steps that you did. I mean, you got a visceral reaction to this shooting. You were in the midst of talking and meeting with others about other issues. Once that particular issue became one that you wanted to pursue, talk about the steps you took to build the support, and whether you spoke to politicians, just the steps that you undertook in order to expand your involvement in that.
Sure. So it started with really talking to my peers about this issue. And a lot of them were just at summer camp wanting to have a good time, so I was very annoying about it. But it started with saying, like, this is an issue that not only we need to care about, but it's something that we can make a change on. That if young people, and we're seeing it happen now, and if young people come together and say, we don't want to live in a country where 33,000 people a year die at the hand of a gun, we can make that change. So we started mobilizing young people around this issue. You educate people, and then we interacted with elected officials, with local mayors, police chiefs, and also lobbying on the Hill, and really tried to get, the biggest thing was getting young people as the people who are doing the work, right? It wasn't an adult was planning this work and brought young people to speak at an event. It was the young people were planning out what we were going to do, what we cared about, and how we were going to make change.
Now, was this something that you were doing when you were attending Ohio State?
So this is something that I was doing during my gap year before college, through my Jewish youth group. And then the next summer, so this was the summer of 2016, another shooting occurred, which was the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, which was horrific. I think it was 51 people, 49 people were killed. And after a year, an entire year of working on this issue, seeing that nothing had changed, I was very frustrated, and worked with a couple of my friends to start an organization called Students Against Gun Violence. And that was something that I'm really proud that we did. It was out of a moment of pain, out of a moment of hurt and not knowing what to do. And what we did was get active and try to make change rather than get discouraged.
Let's again. I like drilling down because I like to hear, because I also think it's a playbook. It's a learning book for others who may be thinking about trying to organize on issues of interest to them. Because I don't want them to cavalierly think that it's easy. We want to let's talk about the process for organizing, because I'm sure that as soon as you said, "Oh, let's talk about guns," thousands of people just didn't jump up and join your cause. Let's peel back what it takes. What are the numbers? In order to move the issue forward, how easily did folks gravitate towards what you were doing?
Sure. So I think the most important thing is that I had incredible people around me, and I can't take credit for any of it that I did alone or was even a majority of the work. I had wonderful people who supported me, and also wonderful people who did the work alongside me. So I had great people, and I also found, and this was a really important thing, I was in a situation where adults gave me the space to lead. And I think it is as incumbent on adults to make that space for young people to lead, to grow, to have ideas and to implement them, as it is for young people to care. Because if we care but aren't allowed into the spaces where we can make change, then it doesn't really matter. And so I was lucky enough to be in a situation where adults believed in me and gave me that space, but also having really talented people who really did the work and made it happen. And I think, it's interesting because I think we did a lot of really good work, but it didn't change national legislation. It didn't accomplish everything we wanted to accomplish. And a piece of it is doing it at the right moment. Because as I've mentioned now, I think for the third time, the Stoneman Douglas students from Parkland, Florida, they've made real change. There's been legislation enacted. They've registered thousands of young voters across the country. And it was this horrific thing that happened to them. This isn't some beautiful, perfect timing thing. It was awful what happened at their school. And they were able to do that same thing. They were able to take that pain and hurt, and they were the right people at the right time to do that. It's an incredible group of people. And the national conversation sort of went with it. And so we didn't really see that with Pulse or with any of the other shootings, or the Las Vegas shooting, which is disappointing because, I mean, people still died, but it just sort of, the media decided to pick this one up. And the students were just incredible from the very beginning. So it's about timing, it's about having the right people, being in the right situation. Again, not that having a shooting at your school is the right situation, but you know, to be able to make change.
Well, you need ways in which to galvanize.
Yes.
You know, you got to be a focal point oftentimes for people to do that. But I listened intently, and I just want to make this parenthetical comment, and that is, you know, you made a statement, you wanted to disabuse yourself of taking all the credit for everything that's done, and that's the sign of a good leader. There are persons who now exist, and he will remain
Wonder who
nameless.
you're talking about, yeah.
You know, in terms of always it's I,
Sure.
I did, I got, I happened, bow down to me, you know, recognize that I'm the one that did it. And that's not leadership.
No, it's not.
Leadership is, because it usually takes a team in order to get it done. If I were to ask you, who are your mentor or mentors? Because again, what I've learned over the course of my own experiences, in most of what I've done, I've had mentors, because they don't remain the same for every circumstance you're in. Who would be some of your mentors if you were to be asked that question?
Yeah,
as I am now.
As I am right now, sure. You know, other than, you know, my parents, who I've mentioned, who have been an incredible influence, and my great uncle, who's been, of course, the biggest influence.
Oh my goodness! Is that Mr. Roy Cohen,
Yeah,
my
course,
executive producer? He has an influence on me as well. So in terms of, I can understand that. I won't say what influence, but he has an influence.
But I would say, you know, through my experience with NIFTY, I was lucky enough to come in contact with some really incredible youth professionals, as well as some really incredible rabbis who really took the time to listen to what I had to say, tell me when I was being ridiculous and wrong, which is also needed. You know, developing young leadership isn't about just saying yes at all times. And there's a couple that really stick out. Joel Massacre, who's a rabbi in New York, who really believed in the work that the organization was doing around gun violence. Beth Roden and Liz Zeller, who are two of the people that run NIFTY, which is the youth movement, really played a really large role in helping me figure out what leadership was and how to do this work.
Well, that's great, and I'm sure there are others that have influenced you, but there are oftentimes is those persons who have made the most dramatic influence and direction giving to you as you move along on different types of issues. Let's talk a little bit about, because I do want to talk about in your efforts both with NIFTY and when you were dealing with the Students Against Gun Violence. Were there any collaborations that you made with other organizations in order to be able to push these issues forward?
Yeah, you have to. I think a lot of the time, different groups sort of, it's comfortable to organize in your own space, but you have to go out into the community, like I said. So a organization that we worked with heavily was Metro Industrial Areas Foundation, which has actually a really great affiliate here in Boston. It's a social justice interfaith organizing group that brings together faith groups in different cities to work on the issues that are important to the city. So the one, I don't remember the name, but the one in Boston was instrumental in healthcare reforms in the 2000s, and I was really lucky to work with a great organization called the Greater Cleveland Congregations, which is the Cleveland affiliate of this organization. And they brought together all different groups of faith, which is something that was really, really powerful. And in the gun violence space, we worked with Everytown for Gun Safety, Brady Campaign, Giffords, so all of the different gun violence organizations work together heavily, and we were able to tap into that a little bit.
The reason why I wanted to focus in on that, because I always like to show history, and if you don't know your history, you often, as they say, you often repeat the bad things that do occur, because those types of connections were also made all during the civil rights movement between the Black and Jewish community.
It's very heavily.
If you talk about the early leaders of the NAACP, some were from the Jewish community.
The Reform movement.
I know I was involved with the Boston branch, and they were persons of Jewish faith and Jewish religion who were involved. So I wanted to make sure that those connections were pointed out. My good friend, the late Lenny Zakem, he looked at trying to make that bridge with the Catholic Church. I know he visited with the Pope at the time. He also made, in the Catholic Church, I think he also went to Ireland. So again, I didn't want folks to walk away from here with the sense of just that you're operating in isolation just within the Jewish faith. That's just not the case, because social justice work will definitely transcend one's own religion and will definitely require you to work with others.
Yeah, and I think a reality in the United States is that, Jews in the United States overwhelmingly have privilege. And again, it's something that we haven't really found in a lot of our situations in our history, but Jews have privilege in the United States. We pass as white a lot of the time and don't have to deal with the repercussions of not passing as white. We have good standing in politics, and so to be a group that has privilege, but also has the understanding of what it's like to be discriminated against and continually still get discriminated against in the United States. When you have that understanding of pain and hurt when you've been othered, you really have a responsibility to take that privilege and do good with it, right? And to help other people who don't have that same privilege. So that's a big part of what it means to be in social justice work as someone who's Jewish in the United States, because it isn't just about, some people think that means like trying to get rid of anti-Semitism. Well, we are trying to get rid of anti-Semitism, but it isn't just about making life better for Jews. It has to be making life better for everyone.
I'm going to roll back a bit because I missed the opportunity to play another tape which showed you when you were heavily involved as the founder and the spokesperson for the Students Against Gun Violence. So I'd like to play that tape, and then after that we're going to come back and talk about what you're going to be doing this fall with the Hillel International Civic Engagement Campaign. We'll talk about that. But if we can roll the tape on the Students Against Gun Violence, that would be great.
Hello, Disarm Hate. Good morning. My name is Jeremy Cronig. I'm a student at The Ohio State University and a founding chair, go Bucks, and a founding chair of Students United Against Gun Violence. We are a young organization, both in our recent creation and demographics. After the tragedy that took place in Orlando, Florida in June, I felt as though I could not hear the news of any more violence and not take action. And in talking with other students, we realized that our voice had to be represented in this fight against gun violence, and that we needed to do something. So we did. We founded Students United, and even before this coming school year has begun, we are engaging thousands of students, their peers, family members, and friends. And we're focusing on being active participants in the national dialogue on making change, while also working on local initiatives where we have students on the ground. And we are not a token youth voice. We are an equal voice in this conversation demanding change on this issue. And this is so important. This is so important because students and young people are disproportionately affected by gun violence. And we experience this on college campuses, in movie theaters, in nightclubs, and in the inner cities around our country. Yet we are rarely a part of the conversation on doing something about it. And youth need a voice at the table when it comes to solving the issues that bring about gun violence. And we, as Students United Against Gun Violence, are making that happen. And we are incredibly proud to have so many students here today from all across the country joining you at Disarm Hate 2016. And you see, young people don't ask for change, we demand it. We demand it and think big because we have big problems to solve. And some people would call this naive, and some people would call this childish, but I call it hopeful. And we don't accept the notion of the status quo. We work to break the fixation on how things have always been in order to find better ways to solve the problems of our world. And this is so vital in our work on preventing gun violence. We're consistently told by politicians, by gun lobbies, that gun violence is too complex to solve. And while I agree it is a complicated issue, we know that with a change in mindset by opponents on gun reform, our country can come together to find solutions. And sadly, this is not the reality we live in today. It is not complicated to see that guns are flooding the streets of our cities. It is not complicated to understand that 33,000 Americans will die at the hands of a firearm this year, and it is not complicated to see that politicians who are in the pockets of the NRA care more about campaign donations than keeping their own constituents alive. And we must work every day to convince the hearts and minds of all Americans that we can come together and find solutions. And most young people look to the future with hope, and we must tap into this sentiment in order to inspire action with everyone to stop the violence plaguing our nation. And look, I'm standing here today as a heterosexual white male from the suburbs. The gun violence of the inner city will most likely never reach my doorstep. And the gun violence of hate will most likely never reach my doorstep. But this does not mean I will turn a blind eye to injustice. And I care deeply about what happens in our country, and I care deeply about the right to live free of fear for all people. And through my leadership with Students United Against Gun Violence, I'm willing to make that fight a reality. And with all of us, such a diverse group here today, I'm reminded of an interpretation of an old Jewish scripture by writer Hugh Niesenson. He talks of the fight against injustice that is so prevalent today. He writes, "The good in us will win. Over all the wickedness, over all the wrongs we have done, and we will look back at the pages of written history and be amazed, and then we will laugh and sing, and the good that is in us, the good that is in us children in their cradles will have won." Our hearts beat with certainty that there is a day and an hour and a mountain called Zion, and that all of the sufferings will gather there and become song, ringing out into every corner of the earth from end to end, and the nations will hear it. And like the caravans in the desert, will all to that morning throng. So Disarm Hate 2016 on this August morning, I ask you, do our hearts beat with certainty? Yes. I ask you, will the good in us win? Because I believe that that day and that hour is now, and that we will look back at the pages of written history and be amazed that starting today, gathering here today, started a movement. And we are starting a movement that will ring out into every corner of the earth from end to end. And through the work we do together, our nation and our elected officials will hear us. It is not time to despair, my friends. It is time to hope, for we have too much work to do. Thank you.
Well, Jeremy, let's let's talk about that particular day. I know you told me it was Washington, D.C., that it was like we're feeling right now here in Boston.
It's like 100 degrees.
Over 100 degrees. I know it was earlier today. Let's talk about that particular event. I know that was early on in your 21 years of your involvements, but why don't we put that, let folks know, amplify on what took place in that clip we just saw.
Sure. So that was the Disarm Hate Rally, so Disarm Hate 2016, which was a group of gun violence organizations came together after the Pulse shooting that we talked about earlier, and had a rally in Washington, D.C. to say that enough was enough, and that it was time for real comprehensive gun violence prevention legislation to be passed. And as I said, sadly, like often with this issue, nothing came of it. It was still impactful, it was still great, and it was really important to get all these different diverse groups together for something that we really cared about. It just shows sort of the gridlock in Washington that
everything takes time, but before we talk about what you're going to be doing in the fall, because our time is eclipsing away, I want the audience to know, because as I said off air, leaders aren't made, leaders are born. And I just recognize by just speaking with you now, looking at historically what you've done and what I'm going to read here, you're a leader, and you're a leader at an early age, and I envision that you're going to be in great places. As I go moving along in my walker, I'm going to say I met that person, Jeremy Cronig, the nephew of Roy Cohen, back in 2018. But let me just paddle off in terms of a number of things. You were co-founder of the Students United Against Gun Violence. You were commission member of the Commission on Social Action for Union for Reform Judaism. You were the fellowship coordinator of the Worldwide Progressive Jewish Movement. You were the chair of campus activism at the Jewish Center for Justice. You were the North American president of the North American Federation of Temple Youth. You were the organizing fellow at Ohio State Staging location director. You worked on different campaigns, one of which was Hillary Clinton's campaign. You were the local leader initiative curriculum instructor for the URJ Kurtz Leadership Institute, and you were involved in the Office of Student Life at Ohio State. So, you know, this is in your blood. What you learned at the table with your parents has definitely translated into you being the person that you are, Jeremy. But before our time runs out, I do want to have us talk about what you're going to be doing at the Hillel International Civic Engagement Campaign this fall.
Sure. So I'm going to be working this fall. So I'm taking the semester off to work full-time for Hillel International, which Hillel is essentially the Jewish community centers on college campuses. And if you've been to a college campus in the United States, you've most likely ran into one because they're on basically every single one.
We had it at Northeastern.
Right, over 500 campuses have a Hillel, which is the building where and the Jewish community on campus. So this fall, Hillel has made it a priority to increase their presence in civic engagement and involve Jewish students in civic engagement work. Mostly meaning getting students to vote. So getting students to register, making it easier for students to register, and giving Jewish students the resources that they need to mobilize their campuses around voting.
Is that a new twist? Is that a new twist for Hillel? I don't recall them being that type of activism when I was in school.
So Jewish students have always been involved with activism, but it's a real, and Hillel has promoted voting, but it's a real, it's one of the first times they've really deeply been invested in this work, and I'm really excited to be a part of it. So I'm taking the semester off to help run the campaign. So it's a voter mobilization campaign in the fall, and yeah, so it's everything that I love doing, and I'm really lucky that I get the opportunity to do it this fall.
Well, we talked about off air some local campaigns that you're working on here in Massachusetts. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Vote for Ayanna Pressley on September 4th. So the primary election day is September 4th, right? Day after Labor Day.
Tuesday.
Yes. So Tuesday. So make a plan to vote over the weekend, over your long weekend. and then get out and vote. Ayana's great. You guys are lucky. I'm from Ohio. Doesn't really work the same in Ohio, where we have incredible progressive candidates running against each other at all times. But Ayana is someone I really believe in, and her message that change can't wait is something that I really resonate with, and I'm excited to see what happens.
We have a few minutes, not a few minutes, we have very few minutes left. Anything you'd like to leave our audience with? You've been extraordinary in my view as a leader.
Thank you.
I'll say young only from the standpoint of age, but clearly not young in terms of the experiences that you've had. Anything you'd like to leave our audience with?
I think I said it before, but I think a really important thing is believing in the young people around you as an adult. If you are in positions of leadership as an adult, making space for the young people that are around you so that they can take ownership. And I think it's something that is too rare, and too often we think about the younger generation as not caring, and I just don't think it's true. I really think we care. I think we care in different ways than we've seen before, and in ways that hopefully we can break down the gridlock that we see, the hatred that we see, the insensitivity that we see, and build an inclusive community. And that's what my generation cares about. That's what we want to do. We just need to be given the space to do it.
Well, thank you for that suggestion for the youths that are listening. Thank you for our adults that are listening. I think that what I want to leave them with is how impressive you are in what you have done. You exude the confidence, the commitment, the drive and determination in order to succeed. And I anticipate that this is not the last time that I might have an opportunity to either hear, learn, or speak to Jeremy Cronig. So again, thank you for being on Community Forum.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.